Everything is happening through these screens.
How are we getting the most out of that person?
I want to see this thing grow long term.
Amazing story. You have such a unique perspective on that.
Schedule a 2-week vacation.
I applaud those models.
Undervalue.
Secure your digital footprint as well.
Why were they even put in place in the first place?
Only the most adaptable survive. Let's get to the leaders list.
Hey, do you have a company or do you have a collection of people who are waiting for you to give them orders? The subject on the leaders list today is going to be succession planning. It doesn't mean you got to quit your job as the CEO and let somebody else take it. What it means is you're going to enable the organization. So Tony Amador and I are going to talk about things that we have seen work in Proxy, working with our clients to help them realize the full potential of the organization by creating great leaders. I'm Bryon Morrison. Let's get to the leaders list. All right, Tony, welcome back to the leaders list. Let's get started on succession planning. So we're going to talk about what I think is probably one of the most important things in any organization is identifying what is the next person up. How can I start to not only see my organization improve because of other people's involvement, but how do I stop being the reason that the organization is not growing? Because that's really what happens when you don't think in terms of succession. So, and by the way, this doesn't mean I got to get out and I got to quit, you know. So how do you start to identify how much of an issue succession planning is? Like, how do you get to that really quickly, Tony?
Yeah, I'd say that the two quick things are in our onboarding, we ask questions about their leadership team because we're going to do a work style assessment with their whole leadership team. So when we introduce that concept, then they may not have a good answer in terms of, well, I have this person that does marketing and this person that does sales and this if they can't rattle off who those people are in the organization that do big jobs, then we start worrying. They start answering instead about, well, I've had some people with me for a really long time. It's not necessarily that. It tends to tell us that. The other thing we ask about is their time away from the business and how much time do they spend either on vacation every year, away from the business. Does the business run without them, or how vital are they? And some of that we find out when we start working, but we ask those questions early too. And soon as you start hearing, oh no, I haven't taken a vacation in a long time, or well, I take a few days off here and there, you start, they don't tend to just flat out tell you it stops without me, because they don't want to say that. But that is what, once you start down those paths, you start realizing that is kind of how it feels, is that it's going to stop without them.
Yeah, I always like to ask, for what period of time could you go away and the organization would continue to run effectively? And that's a great separator, right? Yeah, I went away for 2 weeks on vacation. Okay, great. Could you go for a month? Could you go for 6 months? Like, could the organization, and obviously things are going to fall by the wayside because a CEO and a founder does have a role to play. Right. But how much can the organization just continue that is a great differentiator and easy question to ask.
One of the things that happened with us one time is we had a client that I don't think we'd really realized they hadn't been on vacation, and we'd been with them a year and a half, and they hadn't, because they're taking days here and there, but they hadn't been on a long vacation. And I don't think I was really even paying attention. I don't think the proxy was really paying attention to it. And one day they were going out of town. They were going to be out of the country for 2.5 weeks. And they were really concerned. And it was because they were the first call for absolutely everything. And so the very first thing we did was just figure out who you're going to call instead. And we'd never done that. He'd never gone through that process of who do you call in this case, because anytime he was gone before, you still called him. So if there was a finance issue while he was gone for a long weekend, you called him. If there was a staffing issue, you called him. And now it's going to be 2.5, 3 weeks out of the country. Let's not do that. Let's really be away. And so the first thing we did was just come up with a call list of who you call if, which just started us down that path of, okay, when you get back, we're going to go farther down this path.
Yeah. So as you get started with planning what succession looks like, part of it is a mindset shift for the executive. and that's an example of what you just gave. But then the organization has to go through some things. So what are some of the key initiatives that we put in place to help people recognize that there is a plan and that there is an infrastructure behind succession?
Yeah, where we start really is, again, that list of who you call just for backups is a good place just to be thinking through, because that process makes a leader start thinking about who would I trust if there was a staffing issue. If someone that there's a key employee gives their notice, who do we call since they're going to be gone? So we start there.
And that's just part of key process mapping, right? I mean, you go through those key processes. And so that is one of those quick things that we do, that we identify all the time. Why is your name on all of these?
Right. Why are you on everything? And then that, I mean, that really does lead straight to, okay, right now, here are your responsibilities. So really thinking about, with the leader, how do you think about your responsibilities in the company? And when they start lining those out by department, usually by function, then you start thinking about, okay, so you're the answer for all things. Who do we have on the staff that could start taking those? So who are our high potentials, or who are just heir apparent? Those are leaders in our organization. We just haven't tapped them to be that level of leader. Now, you may not be all the way in that place. You might be farther along, and maybe you have one of those people. You really have a trusted person on the team that you feel pretty confident they could take over customer service or client relationships, or or maybe you have a finance person that's strong like that. But it is really then identifying, okay, the hats that you need to be wearing as a CEO. So as your company is growing and you're legitimately a CEO, you're not the one in the business that same way. You're legitimately doing the 2 or 3 big things of a CEO, the brand and the culture, and really guiding your business that way. Well, then who are your hypos? Who are those people that you've identified that can take other roles? And then where are those gaps? Where do we not have people? And it's time to be thinking about, when I put a plan out for 3 years, I need to have one of these, and I need to have one of these, so that I can start watching for that while I'm hiring, and go down that path. So that's that's a big place where we start.
Yeah, so you mentioned hypos, and that's high potential employees. That's really identifying your talent pool, right? And so I think about stack ranking, and I think succession planning is just a stack ranking on steroids, right? Because if you go through, for those that don't know, stack ranking is looking at your entire staff, and you have A level, which are, exceptional. You have B level, they're intermediate and they're being trained up. And then there's C level, who you can train up to B, or they probably shouldn't be in the organization. And so, if I think about, that's old school Jack Welch, GE, the perspective is you should be losing 10 to 15%, of the staff on rotation, because you're trying to up the level.
Right.
And that's a important process to go through. But when you have the A's actually become somebody that you can start to count on more and more, and give them more responsibility. And so I always kind of think of, succession planning like stack ranking on steroids.
Right.
And so understanding, that's when we think about hypos and high potential employees, that's a key. Okay, so what if you don't have that high potential? You don't have that hypo on your team that you go, man, I see how I've got the pool already in place. Or you have really great functional leaders, but you don't see them transitioning into the next level.
Right.
What do you do in that situation?
Yeah, once you realize that, and you say, okay, well, where am I? Do I need a president? Do I need a COO? Who do I want in that role? Again, assuming that you're not saying
general manager.
Right, general manager. It's not that. So we're not talking about I'm out. I just need a real number 2. Then it is, let's get a job. We help put a job description together, and we start looking for that person. And so using the personal net, the client's personal network, as well as just going out and doing a search in some cases. And then the big thing really is, if they haven't had a number 2 before, then there's a whole learning curve around how you work with a number 2. And so that's its own thing. So again, from a planning perspective of succession planning, again, we added in there, we think of it this way, is that again, the succession is responsibilities are being handed off, not just that you're moving out. And so then it really is having really great communication around expectations and roles, and then learning how to work that way with somebody that's in this new role that wasn't already in your company.
Yeah, and this is total shameless plug, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. The difference in when proxy comes in and sets a foundation for the number two being able to come in, that is a massive difference from, hey, I've got a bit of a train wreck here, or I've got a whole bunch of things that need done, because there's a natural tendency for anybody in that role to have lots of people in the organization come to them because they're excited and they know somebody is new. And so what we've been able to do is kind of become a bridge for that individual to be able to get to know the people and to be able to embed themselves and to be able to give them data coming in so that they can be more strategic, as opposed to, I got to fix tactics.
Right.
Hiring in number two is a really challenging thing. To bring somebody in at that super high level, our recommendation typically is to bring someone up, but then bridge that individual. So whether that is with fractional talent, I would highly recommend a proxy, or whether that is someone where you really own mentoring that person into the role. It's a better option typically. And if you look at the statistics, people brought in from the outside tend to not do well in, their success rate, I think, is something like 30 to 40% less than someone who is part of the organization. So it's just something to consider. That's a great point.
It is. And to your point about that, proxy has helped that and makes that number you're talking about, 30 to 40%. Our clients have experienced a much higher rate of success. Oh, yeah. Because I think we are bridging that, right? We are preparing the company a different way. We're preparing the leader a different way. And we're able to prepare the new number two a different way, to your point about here's the history, here's all these things that companies don't usually just sit around having all that ready to hand to someone. And so Proxy's has been able to help do that.
What about communications? One of the things that I've always found really interesting, and we implement this quite a bit, is helping a CEO move into the next level by giving them almost chairman responsibilities, right, and helping them understand, how should I have my team report up to me? And it is really kind of like taking a chairman position versus an in the weeds position. And so that actually, I think, helps a ton with that mindset shift as well. Have you seen that when we've gone through that with companies?
I have. I mean, we do this thing. I mean, pretty early on, we're helping obviously with communication. And so if they're not doing an all hands meeting every quarter, if they're not doing some meeting like that, well, then we're going to get that implemented. And then we're going to figure out what that right agenda is for their staff and for their team. And in the beginning, this kind of company that still has that founder leader that is handling everything, well, they're probably the one doing the talking, and they're setting the stage, they're setting the tone. And they're really figuring out this is what it's going to be like every month. And then because we started identifying who those next leaders are, we start looking for opportunities for other people to speak. And so now we have a way, that we've already established, this is how we're going to communicate in the organization. Now we're going to change, we're going to add people to that so that it's not just one voice. Now you start hearing a second voice, a third voice, and so on. And so now just naturally the team starts feeling and seeing who the other leaders in the organization are. And you get very deliberate about that, right? So yes, there could be a presentation that happens every month that anyone on the staff gives. That's different. This is a specific part of the agenda, whether that's sales or whether that's client satisfaction and how we're taking care of clients, some piece that we're starting to hand to someone else, that they're going to be the authority. And so we get them to talk in the meeting and we just get that process started.
Yeah, I think giving them the stage, right? That's where you start to understand how people receive messages from them. Can you see them step into those shoes?
Yep.
So Give us a little bit of a feel. So those are all some great tactics to put in place, and obviously one other big one that comes behind that is training, right? So like preparing somebody for the role. What are some things that you guys have done with some of our clients to do that?
Yeah, that's such an interesting one. A lot of times, especially when a founder hasn't had a number two or a leadership team that way, is that they haven't really thought of their people like that. They've been thinking this whole time that someone could be with them for years and they're great at this job. And as long as they're great at that job, they don't talk about a lot else. Well, as soon as they go down the path of now you're going to be responsible for this division or this department, well, now it changes, right? Now you're the leader, you're the voice instead of the founder being the voice. And so the one-on-ones that the founder has with their lead team have to change, and they have to be thinking more about mentoring. They have to be thinking more about what training their folks might need. Maybe they have that knowledge and they can pass it along. Maybe they need to get them into some kind of leadership training program so that they're learning other skills. But they really are now focused on rounding out the skills specifically as a leader in the organization.
Yeah, that's great stuff, Tony. You know, another thing that makes a ton of sense in preparing somebody for this is job rotation. So literally letting them go through that process of seeing the organization from different angles. And that's pretty common in Fortune 500. But when you talk about small to medium-sized businesses, you don't see that as much, right?
Right. Yeah. And so what we'll do is, early on, if we're talking about EOS and we're using an accountability chart and we've identified who's responsible and who those key leaders are, well, then right away, when you're in this spot where you don't necessarily have a leadership team that has very distinct roles, to your point about how a Fortune 500 would, in a smaller business, everybody's pitching in, everybody's helping the leader, the founder's been the one responsible for everything. So it is a great way where we'll talk about, okay, well, for the next 6 months, for the next year, this person A is going to be responsible for marketing and person B is going to be responsible for operations. Because again, you don't have people that are the leaders of those necessarily, but you're learning the business and you're learning all the parts of the business that way. And so knowing that you're going to trade off, it does definitely get you in that spot. And again, what a founder should always be thinking about is that there's multiple people that they're grooming to be leaders. Right. So it's not that when we talk about succession, it does not mean who is my replacement tomorrow. That's not where we are, especially when we're talking early like this, where you're just starting to think more about a leadership team. Well, then you need to have multiple people that you're bringing along, that you're bringing up, that are starting to fill that. So yes, doing job swapping like that, responsibility swapping, definitely puts you in that spot where more people are learning different facets of the business.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So listen, this is super helpful. I hope everybody takes this information, starts thinking about tomorrow. What can I do? What could I test out? What could I start putting in place? But the reality is that's pretty challenging, and it can also come off the wrong way. And so at minimum, if we can help out just with talking through, how do you start to do some of these things? We're happy to do that. Tony, thanks so much for putting this together and being able to talk through how an organization can have the next person step up and be ready to take on leadership roles. Any parting thoughts on how somebody should get started and what they should do first in their plan for succession?
Yeah, if this thing feels too big, schedule a 2-week vacation. Get yourself out of the country. Get away, man. Just get away, and you will have to figure out how things will go without you, and it'll make you realize what things you need to work on when you get back.
That's a great piece of advice. I love it. All right. Thanks very much, and thanks everybody for joining the Leaders List.